Hey guys, my name is Trevor Donovan, in case we haven't met yet. So I'm presenting tonight on why I believe that natural gas is and or isn't a great source of energy for the US and for the world as a whole to use both now and in the future. So I did this project with Rianna, and together we made a PowerPoint that I will be opening up shortly. So let's start up here. Yeah, so when I was doing this research, we encountered roughly 20 to 30 sources, mostly government sources, and we found quite a few interesting data points about natural gas. So just some of the basics around natural gas. It is extracted from the earth via injection techniques in which chemicals are injected through tubes and pipes roughly 50 to 100 meters below, at least that much. Below the Earth's surface. And to find these unrefined types of natural gas, which can then be refined later, these types of gas include shale gas and tight gas, although there are more refined types of gas that are found in their liquid form. Roughly 350 trillion cubic feet of natural gas exists in the US, so it's a very abundant source of energy in the United States and abroad, but the U.S. is one of the world's leading producers of natural gas. And natural gas is primarily transported and stored in its liquid state, which will come up later, just because having an energy source that's in its liquid state makes it very easy to be transported through pipelines and through tankers and across all sorts of environmental and geological barriers. So yeah, we'll go on to the next slide. So the argument for natural gas relies mostly on 5 points. And those points are A, that natural gas is pretty clean, especially compared to other fossil fuels such as coal and petroleum. Second, that it's pretty cheap. So natural gas, as I'll get into later, compared to some renewable source of energy and even to some non-renewable sources of energy, is a very cheap energy source. Some of the other arguments that natural gas is a good source of energy rely on the fact that natural gas is abundant, it's easy to transport, and that the transportation is already in place. So the US has a very wide and expansive infrastructure system set up to support the storage and transportation of natural gas. So this is the first argument: natural gas is abundant. And so this is pretty inarguable. It's pretty indisputable, in fact. Like over 2,355 trillion cubic feet of technically recoverable resources of dry natural gas exist in the United States. That was an estimate in 2015, and it's actually gone up just because there's been a sudden discovery of a few different major sources of proven resources for gas. So with that amount of natural gas, the Energy Information Administration predicts that it could last the United States a century, nearly a century. I believe it's 86 years at the current rate of consumption, which is 27.3 trillion cubic feet per year. Worldwide, there are over 6,000 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Most of it does come from the US, Russia, North Africa, and the Middle East. So in addition to Venezuela, which is a kind of an outlier as far as natural gas is concerned. So continents such as Europe often struggle to receive natural gas, and so the prices are much higher there, and it becomes much more of a political tool. So the second argument in favor of natural gas is that it's relatively clean. So compared to other fossil fuels, natural gas emits much less CO2 or carbon dioxide when burned. It burns 45% less, it emits 45% less carbon dioxide than coal and 30% less than oil/petroleum. However, natural gas does release methane into the environment, which is very powerful. The Energy Information Administration, which is an independent administration, believes that methane is roughly 25 times more powerful than carbon dioxide over a 100-year period, although it lasts much less time in the atmosphere. So in the combustion of natural gas, none of the emitted gas is actually methane, but it can leak during the extraction process and or during the transportation and storage process if there's faulty infrastructure. So the other nice thing about natural gas that could potentially be very good for its future is that it's considered by many to be a bridge fuel, which means that while it's not what the environment and the economy wants for the long haul, natural gas provides a phenomenal transition from fossil fuels of old into more expensive but renewable and completely clean energies such as solar, hydropower, wind, etc. And that is a very convincing argument just because it really is not the perfect situation, especially because it is non-renewable, but it could last a very long time and it can help to decrease our impact on the environment in the short run. The third argument is that infrastructure to support the transportation and storage of natural gas is already in place. So since the 1960s, the U.S. has really had a pretty grand system of producing wells, processing plants, compressor stations, underground storage facilities, gas-fired power plants, and most importantly, over 1.6 million miles of pipeline to support the storage, extraction, and transportation of natural gas. In 2015, natural gas production reached a record high of 79 billion cubic feet per day in the United States. And predictions back in 2015 estimated that roughly a third of the United States electricity would be generated by natural gas. So yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory. The system's already in place, so there's not really a cost barrier to having natural gas as one of the leading energy sources for the United States and abroad. Based on that, natural gas is pretty cheap just because the infrastructure is in such prominent condition that it's pretty cheap to extract and transport and store natural gas, and then finally to convert it into energy which can be used in households and companies. So in 2015, the price per million British thermal units reached only $1.57, which was the lowest since the turn of the 21st century. And though fuel prices can vary dramatically across regions, particularly in the United States, natural gas is almost always cheaper than oil and coal. On July 1st, 2016, for example, the average price in the U.S. per million British thermal units was $2.93 for natural gas, which was a year-long high, and $8.45 for crude oil. The low price in the United States is due to the large quantities in production and storage, just because the U.S. does rely so heavily on natural gas as an energy source. So those are some of the main arguments for natural gas. I'm now going to present some of the arguments against natural gas. The first of these is that while it's cleaner than some of the fossil fuels, natural gas can be very bad for the environment. The combustion of natural gas does not emit as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but there's still a significant impact. This is because leakages of methane can be extremely harmful. The Energy Information Administration, which I keep referencing, it's a pretty credible source, estimates that methane has over 84 times the impact that carbon dioxide does over a 20-year period. And because methane doesn't last quite as long in the atmosphere, that impact is reduced to 25 times the impact that carbon dioxide does over a 100-year period. Leakages of methane generally occur during the extraction process, but occasionally they can occur due to faults in the storage and transportation infrastructure. A great example of this came in October 2015 to February 2016, when the California storage facility at Aliso Canyon had a massive methane leak, which you can see in the bottom right. This resulted in incredibly harmful environmental conditions, so people were having trouble breathing. And eventually the company did get it under control, but it just goes to show that natural gas can be very dangerous, not just for the environment, but for the people who live around it. And it's not necessarily a long-term issue. It can be very short-term, as it was in Aliso Canyon, California. Another argument against natural gas as a leading energy source is that it's non-renewable. So while it can be conserved for a very long time, as I mentioned before, natural gas can be conserved if the U.S. stays at the current consumption rates for approximately 84 years. it really isn't the long-term answer for our society, both in the US and the world as a whole. Primarily just because it's a finite resource. You can't create more of it. And it requires drilling into areas of natural beauty, which generally isn't the main concern that people have with natural gas, although it's seen quite a bit of resurgence recently with the Trump administration's plan to sell off some of the national parks, particularly in the western United States, to create more opportunity for companies to drill into national parks and find natural gas. So yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory. The system supporting natural gas needs fixing. So this is what I was talking about earlier. While the infrastructure is absolutely in place for natural gas to remain as one of the leading energy sources, it's very difficult to predict leaks, and more importantly, it's very difficult to prevent them. This is because the natural gas infrastructure system has a rapidly aging storage and transportation infrastructure. So this is primarily due to the amount of pipeline that was built in earlier decades, particularly in the 1950s and 1960s, as you can see in the chart to your right. And basically what this indicates is that there could be some massive faults with the natural gas infrastructure. And because methane leaks are so difficult to predict, it can really pose a massive hazard to many regions of the United States, just because pipelines really do cover pretty much the entire map. There's a definite correlation with age as far as natural gas leaks go, and methane leaks in particular. So for example, the Aliso Canyon leak, the pipeline was the storage facility that had been built there, where the leak occurred. That was built back in the 70s. And the federal government has taken quite a bit of flack actually for this, just because there's the argument that if they are potentially inducing hazards, environmental and economic, and most importantly public health hazards in the United States, they really should be updating their infrastructure. And so that does pose a pretty massive cost barrier. And it's the question, it begs the question, like, should the U.S. even update this infrastructure just because it is a non-renewable resource? It won't be there forever. And that's just a question that depends on people's viewpoints about natural gas as an energy source, both now and in the future. So these are some of my sources. These are the main ones I used in the PowerPoint. So what I found out about natural gas is just that, I'll go back to the, here we go. Hello again. So the main things that I found out about natural gas is just that it really depends on how you see its future unfolding. So many, including the Forbes columnist James Conca, believe that natural gas really could be the future of both the U.S. economy and the global economy. It offers a bridge fuel, a rather sustainable option in comparison to some of the fossil fuels that have dominated the energy landscape for centuries. But at the same time, it's not the perfect solution. So the question is, could it last us this century? Could it last us half a century? And that's where differing opinions come into play. Basically, my leading thesis regarding natural gas as an energy source is that it is good as a bridge fuel. It's a phenomenal alternative to coal and petroleum for both the U.S. and countries around the world, due to its low price point, due to its abundance and pre-existing infrastructure that supports the transportation, storage, production, and conversion into energy. However, there are some major red flags. It is bad for the environment. There's no getting around that the carbon dioxide and the methane emitted into the environment are really just not sustainable at all. And in addition, it really poses a pretty big cost barrier just due to the necessary updates needed to the infrastructure. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my presentation. We were going to have an interview, but with one of our leading natural gas experts, Rianna, and another version of Trevor Donovan, who is going to be very anti-natural gas. But I really hope you enjoyed this and took away a better understanding of why natural gas is and isn't a good energy source for the United States and for the global economy to use. Thank you.